dangerous. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa Parivajikacharya Ashtottara Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parajikacharya Ashtottara Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavani ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Samaveda Bhaktavrinda ki jai. All glories to the Assam of devotees. All glories to the Assam of devotees. All glories to the Assam of devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. On this 12th day of April 2021 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are in chapter 10, the opulence of the Absolute. Text number 6 on page 427. 427. And if I neglected to do so, I'd like to welcome all our online students as well. Hare Krishna. Okay, text number 6. Maharshaya Sapta Purve Chatvaro Manavastatha Madbhava Manasa Jata Yesham Loka Ima Praja Maharshiyak Sapta Purve Chatvaro Manavastatha Madbhava Manasa Jata Yesham Loka Hima Praja Maharshiyak Sapta Purve Chatvaro Manavastatha Madbhava Manasa Jata Yeshang Loka Hima Praja Maharshiyak Sapta Purve Chatvaro Manavastatha Madbhava Manasa Jata Yesham Loka Hima Praja Maharshiyak Sapta Purve Chatvaro Manavastatha Madbhava Manasa Jata Yesham Loka Hima Praja Maharshiyak Sapta Purve Chatvaro Manavastatha Madbhava Manasa Jata Yesham Lokam Ima Praja. All right, I'll read the synonyms myself. Maharishiya, the great sages, Sapta, 7, Purve, before, Chatvaraha, 4, Manavaha, Manus, Tata, also, Madbhavaha, born of me, Manasaha, from the mind, Jataha, born, Yesham, of them, Loke, in the world, Imaha, all this, Prajaha, population. Translation. The 7 great sages, and before them the 4 other great sages, and the Manus, progenitors of mankind, come from me, born from my mind, and all the living beings populating the various planets descend from them. Purport. The Lord is giving a genealogical synopsis of the universal population. Brahma is the original creature born out of the energy of the Supreme Lord, who is known as Hiranyagarbha. And from Brahma, all the 7 great sages, and before them 4 other great sages, named Sanaka, Sananda, Sanatan, and Sanat Kumar, and the 14 Manus are manifested. All these 25 great sages are known as the patriarchs of the living entities all over the universe. There are innumerable universes and innumerable planets within each universe, and each planet is full of population of different varieties. All of them are born of these 25 patriarchs. Brahma underwent penance for 1,000 years of the demigods before he realized by the grace of Krishna how to create. Then from Brahma came Sanaka, Sananda, Sanatan, and Sanat Kumar. Then Rudra, and then the 7 sages. And in this way, all the Brahmins and Kshatriyas are born out of the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Brahma is known as Pitamaha, the grandfather, and Krishna is known as Prapitamaha, the father of the grandfather. That is stated in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 11:39. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So this chapter is entitled The Opulence of the Absolute, Vibhuti Yoga. All the chapters have the name yoga in them. Vibhuti means opulences or powers. And so if you notice, Krishna has been outlining some of his powers here. In text 4 and 5, he's given a list of things of which he is the origin. In text 3, he describes that one who knows that he is the Lord of all universes is freed from birth and death. He says he's the origin of all the sages and all the demigods like that. So this chapter, in a few verses now, I think we'll get it tonight, has the 4 essential verses of the Bhagavad Gita coming up. And these give when Krishna says, I'm the source of everything, then there could be no greater power than that. And that's when it's coming up. And that's the definition of the Brahman in the Vedanta Sutra. Atato Brahma Jigyasa Janma Jasya Yataha. Those are the first 2 sutras. In this human form of life, one should inquire into Brahman. What is that Brahman? The source of everything. That which creates everything, sustains everything, and ultimately dissolves everything. That's the definition. So Krishna is defining himself in that way. And here he's describing how the universe gets populated. Anyone who's an intelligent human being should ask probing questions, essential questions, like, where did I come from? What is all this? Is there a meaning to it? Is there a way to end all the suffering? I see all around me as you grow up. You grow out of your idyllic little childhood, and if you're lucky, you have one. And before long, your grandmother dies or somebody. Suddenly, I told this story. The first time I remember, I don't know, it was maybe 8 or 9. And my grandmother, who we used to visit once a week, and I had a nice relationship with her, and suddenly she died. And it was a big shock. It's like Buddha. Buddha went out of the protected palace, the story. And he was pampered, the prince. And then suddenly he saw someone under a tree dying, and what is all this? And he questioned and he became Buddha, and he renounced the idea that if you become attached to this world, that's the source of suffering. But why? Why? Why can't we be blissful all the time? This is a question we should ask, and if we're fortunate, we'll get the answers from books like Bhagavad Gita as it is. So Krishna here is describing in summary form. Bhagavad Gita is very summary form. The more detailed explanation you'll find in Bhagavad Purana, which we also have, the Srimad Bhagavatam, how everything came to be. And Prabhupada's giving the summary here. And here it's very interesting. He says it's created from my mind. In the beginning, there was just Brahma. It's not like there's a female around to propagate. Brahma alone was created from the lotus of growing out of the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. He's known as Aja, kind of unborn, because he's not born in the normal way. And he had no idea where it came from. Everything is dark, and he's sitting on this lotus. And so what to do? So he's thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And there was this sound that came. You know what it was? The 2 syllables, tapa, he heard in the ether. 3 times, actually. Tapa means penance, austerity. And he was so intelligent, he said, okay, that means I have to meditate. So he's meditating. And finally he gets inspired from within the heart by Krishna. And all the Vedic knowledge is manifest. And then he also learns, as explained in his purport, how to create. So what has he got to work with? Himself, basically. So he's, from his own mind, he's creating these great rishis who then will become the progenitors of everything, and gradually the universe becomes populated. There's much more detail, as I said, in the Bhagavad Purana. But where did Brahma come from? He comes from Vishnu. Where does Vishnu come from? He comes from Krishna. And we'll learn that in a few verses, that ultimately everything is sourced from Krishna. And we also have an intimate, unbreakable relationship with God, which we've forgotten. And that having forgotten that, that's the source of our whole problems. And that's why this whole science of Bhakti Yoga is based on increasing our remembrance of God and using all our energies that we have, physical, mental, intellectual, whatever we have at our disposal, connecting them to Krishna through the process of loving service, and in this way gradually purifying our mind, senses, and consciousness, and becoming reinstated in our natural situation, which is Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. Is that where we are now? Are you eternal? Yes. You're eternal, but this body's not eternal. And you're not always full of bliss, right? Full of knowledge? We're all like that. And we're human beings. Yet you can imagine the lower animals, they're also living beings. They're also souls, but their kindness is more covered. They don't have a chance to sit in Bhagavad Gita class. Even there's just a very few human beings that are, studying Bhagavad Gita. What to speak of the animals? So it's a reformatory. This whole creation is not a place for our enjoyment. It's a place for us to learn how to really enjoy by giving up sensual enjoyment and learning how to enjoy our relationship with Krishna. So we'll learn more about that in the coming verses. Any comments or questions on this verse? We can go on to the next verse. Oh. Tapas? No. Okay. Text 7. Etam vibhutim yogam cha mamayo veti tatpataha so vikalpena yogena yujyate natra sangshayaha. One who is factually convinced of this opulence and mystic power of mine engages in unalloyed devotional service. Of this there is no doubt. Purport. The highest summit of spiritual perfection is knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one is firmly convinced of the different opulences of the Supreme Lord, he cannot engage in devotional service. Generally, people know that God is great, but they do not know in detail how God is great. Here are the details. If one knows factually how God is great, then naturally he becomes a surrendered soul and engages himself in the devotional service of the Lord. When one factually knows the opulences of the Supreme, there is no alternative but to surrender to him. This factual knowledge can be known from the descriptions in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita and similar literatures. In the administration of this universe, there are many demigods distributed throughout the planetary system, and the chief of them are, Brahma, Lord Shiva, I'm sure, and the 4 great Kumaras and the other patriarchs. There are many forefathers of the population of the universe, and all of them are born of the Supreme Lord, Krishna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the original forefather of all forefathers. These are some of the opulences of the Supreme Lord. When one is firmly convinced of them, he accepts Krishna with great faith and without any doubt, and he engages in devotional service. All this particular knowledge is required in order to increase one's interest in the loving devotional service of the Lord. One should not neglect to understand fully how great Krishna is, for by knowing the greatness of Krishna, one will be able to be fixed in sincere devotional service. So this is a very important point, and that is that the details of how God is great and the details of our unbreakable relationship with Him are so important. There are many religions throughout the world, we know that. And they all have some conception of the God, the greatest, most powerful. Oftentimes, you'll find because without the science of bhakti, which sublimates one's material desire, one material's attraction into attraction for God, one is faced with the powerful urges of the senses and the mind to enjoy in this world, enjoy sense gratification. And that the more that we yield to that impetus to enjoy, and this whole society we live in, Kali Yuga, especially advanced civilization that we live in now, so-called advanced, provides innumerable ways to satisfy one's senses. And there's always new ways coming up. And so you really, without the how shall I say it, the inoculation, in other words, of transcendental knowledge, you're helpless. I like to give you the example, it happens, I'm sure, millions of times every day in America and throughout the world. You walk into a modern supermarket. You got to go shopping. You have maybe a family to support. And what are you looking for? Something that tastes good, In other words, something that oftentimes in today's age, when there's some people are so much harassed by debt and have to work 3 jobs, no time to cook, spend time cooking. Want fast food, snacks, something to fill my children's belly, And oftentimes, there's nothing else but this engineered food and processed food. And so, the huge conglomerates, agriculture and food production, they produce the foods that are irresistible. And I would say, and it's been proven, addictive. Potato chips, sounds innocuous. But what goes in there? They engineer it in such a way that it has a certain mouthfeel. And of course, there's plenty of salt and sugar and fat in there, those 3 combinations. And and you can't, and they even advertise. I remember, a long time, you can't eat just 1. Oftentimes you can't eat just 10 or 20. So what does that do? That completely covers any question of, inquiring into things like that. What does speak of eating meat and all kinds of, horrible substances? So, in human society, unless there is a structure of education and genuine transcendental knowledge that's coming down, like from Bhagavad Gita, as it is, then they say, Loke vivaya misha madhya seva. There's a verse that describes this, that this is what will happen. That the people are attracted to these 3 things. They don't mention gambling, but they mention the other ones. Unrestricted sexual activities, vyavaya, amisha, meat eating, and madhya seva, intoxication, specifically mentions drinking. So this is death for the soul in the terms of spiritual advancement. It so much entangles one because it covers one's consciousness, it perverts one. So in Srila Prabhupada's, when he began his movement, it was very radical. He comes into the middle of the Lower East Side, which was one of the 2 main centers of the hippie era. The others were, of course, San Francisco. And what was going on? Drug taking, free sex, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, basically. And here he comes into this middle, and he teaches no illicit sex, no gambling, no intoxication, no meat eating, And so, how is it possible that it was able to be successful? Because he also gave the chanting of the holy name, the chanting of Hare Krishna, even without any prerequisites. And this is so important. If you want to practice traditional Vedic sacrifices and study the Vedas, you have to be a Brahmin, you have to be you can't just walk off the street, you can't be a Sudra, Chandala. But this is what he was working with. People had no background. But in one sense that was an advantage. They didn't know anything and they were ready to experiment because there was a whole mind expanding element to it with the LSD drug. If it had just been liquor, it probably wouldn't have worked. Krishna sent him just at the right time. If he'd come 10 years earlier or 10 years later, I don't know if he would have been successful. Anyway, so by chanting Hare Krishna, no matter what, you have to be a little bit sane and together, but basically, you could get a taste. You can feel some pleasure coming from the spiritual stratum, as Prabhupada says in his famous address on that album. Have you ever heard it? And that's if you're fortunate and have some background in piety or even some devotional service previous life, you'll be intrigued and you'll want to know the philosophy behind it. You'll be ready. In other words, you'll hear the kirtan, which often went time for an hour, oftentimes going on for an hour, led by Prabhupada. You can imagine how potent that is. And then you'll sit still for the lecture. That was the program. Kirtan, lots of kirtan, lecture, more kirtan, prasadam. And then oftentimes you'll sit through the lecture because you know there's prasadam at the end, but at least you're getting the lecture. Yeah. Oh, kirtan is congregational chanting. We had a little kirtan. Yeah, and we'll have some more in about half an hour. So anyway, the idea is that the process of bhakti can, for the fortunate soul, can purify the mind and senses so that you begin to get a taste for this higher pleasure, which is not based just on the senses and the mind, but is based on the soul. And that spiritual pleasure is where we belong. This other kind of gratification is completely artificial. We don't need these bodies. These bodies are artificial for us. We go one after another, and each one, as Krishna says, and who can argue with it, Dukali Mashashvatam, this material world in which we take all these various bodies, is an abode of suffering. There's a little bit of pleasure in there, but there's a whole ton of suffering. I was just reading how, when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, we had this thing of the sword of Damocles. It's from the Greeks, It's like this big sword and there's a thread. And I think someone slept on a bed under it or something. I forget. It's like always threatening you. You can't have any peace of mind, because there's this big danger. And so I'm growing up, and World War II had ended with a bang. The first atomic bomb, they blew, they dropped them. And the whole Cold War was going on, and all movies were coming out, The End of the World, 7 Days in May. Then they had one in the 80s, The Day After, what it would be like if there was a nuclear war. Everything is destroyed. We're sitting like 20 miles. How far is San Onofre from here? Not very far. Does anyone know the area here? 20 miles. That's nothing. There's all of this nuclear waste buried there, 100 feet from the ocean, just waiting for some big wave to come. Anyway, the point is, life is on a very unsteady platform, and so the question is, how can we get out of it? What's the solution to it? The solution is to act in such a way so you don't have to take birth again. We're all going to die eventually. The question is, what is your consciousness going to be at that time? It's already been explained in chapter 8 that your consciousness at the time of death will determine your next life. And if you're purely Krishna conscious, God conscious, you won't take birth again in a material body. You'll go back home, back to Godhead. This phrase used to be on everybody's lips back in, when Prabhupada started it. This is the goal. Back home, that's where we came from. So what are we doing in this world? Now, this COVID thing has, in one sense, for devotees, says, oh, yeah, we can see this is a abode of misery. How can there be happiness when at any moment some invisible virus can take over and you can die a horrible death, hardly breathing, and you can't even have your loved ones near you? I mean, this is like a horrific thing. Suddenly the bloom is off the rose, Now you see people trying to forget, more party time. For a whole year we're restricted. But that's foolish. It's just ensuring more suffering, Better to understand how to end all suffering and how to attain this bliss. And that's what Krishna is teaching us. We all have that unbreakable relationship with Krishna. That's described, he's the ultimate father of everyone. He's the great-grandfather, but he's the source of all of us. We have that unbreakable relationship. If we can cultivate, reawaken it through the science of bhakti, and this studying the Bhagavad Gita as it is an important part of it. Hearing the Shastra, and then trying to imbibe the truths and the instructions and put them into light, into your, you go at your own speed. But it's not impossible. This movement is all over the world in all cultures, and people are doing it. So, let's see, how far did we get? Okay, that's 7, right? We did 7. So I propose that we go to 8 unless there's some questions. Because this is the first of the essential 4 verses in the Bhagavad Gita. So we should listen up. Now there's some long purports here because Prabhupada is quoting various verses that support what Krishna says, or confirm. Please, please. Yeah, please use the mic so others can...
Right. When it talks about the opulences of the Supreme Lord, what exactly are they referring to? Maybe I misunderstood, I think.
Okay, it's a simple thing. The question was, what are the opulences? Because that's this chapter. So, opulences simply means, let's say in the most basic sense, desirable characteristics. Just like we have some opulences. We have a certain amount of physical beauty, at least for some time. A certain amount of wealth, a certain amount of knowledge. We may have some influence. We may have some celebrity or fame like that. So, to know that God has these things in infinite, a measure. Just like one opulence, say, wealth. It's called Aishwarya in Sanskrit. So, we learn here, and we're going to study in a second, as soon as we read this verse, that God is the source of everything. And so, in another book called the Isha Upanishad, the very first mantra says, Isha Vasamidam Sarvam, that since God is the controller of everything, He's really the owner of everything. In other words, everything comes from Him. If I work very hard and produce something, then it's, and it's mine, it's on my property, then I own it. I can control it. I can get benefit from it. Okay? But God, who is the creator of everything, ultimately owns everything. We're using some things temporarily for our benefit, but they ultimately belong to Him. And part of the philosophy is, okay, if it belongs to God, then it should be used in His service. Just like this building. It wasn't always a temple. It wasn't built as a temple. It was built as a warehouse or something. I think it was a movie theater at some time, back in the 50s, whatever. Then in 1978, it was bought, and for a year they worked on the inside and created all this, wonderful imagery and the sculpture and everything, and what to speak of the deities. It's been made into a temple. So the same brick and mortar and wire and whatever else goes into a building is now being used to glorify God. So that's the proper use of it. When we ourselves have a certain amount of energy, intelligence, and wealth, whatever it may be. The more of that we can use for service to God, under the instruction of experienced sages like Srila Prabhupada. He's given so much instructions in the books. The freer we'll be. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, one of the ways in which we're bound in this world is by what's called karma. This is an English word now, it's in the dictionary. And people understand to some degree. What's that phrase? What goes around comes around? So that's true. If you do something very sinful, what do we say sinful in this life? Suppose you out of anger you kill somebody. Well, okay, you may not get caught. You won't get caught. It's in secret. But is it really in secret? Because one of the things we learn in the Bhagavad Gita that God is in your heart. There's a super soul. He expands. So He's with us. He knows everything we've done, everything we're thinking. Plus, there's a whole government of demigods. You don't escape anything. That activity you will pay for in this life or in a future life. That's called karma. There's also good karma. If you're very kind, you give charity, you help other people, that'll come back to you too. So, we have certain limited opulences, certain little things that are of value, but they're temporary. Like I mentioned, beauty. How beautiful can you be, when you get 70, 80, but there's a multi-billion-dollar industry of people who want to try to hold on to as much beauty as possible. So, so much artificial things and things. But it's a very fleeting thing. So, but Krishna is always beautiful. If you were God, would you get old? No. He doesn't get old. What else would you do? You wouldn't work. You have nothing to do. You would play all day. And that's what He does. He takes a role in the spiritual world where there's a variety of loving exchanges with other people. That's really where pleasure is, isn't it? In having, either your friends or your girlfriend, your wife, whatever. He has all these relationships. As a loving child with a parent, he covers all of the majesty of the creation of the universe. And there's a great soul like his mother, who plays as his mother eternally. Many other mother figures. And she always has this feeling, oh, this is my darling little child, so beautiful. I have to protect him. I have to feed him, like that. So that's a rasa. That's a relationship that can be enjoyed. And there's no, Prabhupada use the word inebrieties. There's no negativities. If you have a little child, we see it all the time, that rasa, the parent and the mother and the child, But the kid grows up. And gradually, he grows away. He goes separate. He's not, and so the rasa is broken. So Krishna, because he's all powerful, but he's also all merciful and all good, and he wants to bring us back into that realm where we can share in those opulences. We can relish in Krishna's beauty, and we can also reflect it. We can have our own natural beauty, and it doesn't fade. That's what opulences mean. Vibhuti. All right, let's read this very important verse, text 8. Aham sarvasya prabhavo mattak sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. Suresh, you close? Do you want to follow along? You got it right there. Yeah. Text page 429. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Purport. A learned scholar who has studied the Vedas perfectly and has information from authorities like Lord Chaitanya, and who knows how to apply these teachings, can understand that Krishna is the origin of everything in both the material and spiritual worlds. And because he knows this perfectly, he becomes firmly fixed in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. He can never be deviated by any amount of nonsensical commentaries or by fools. All Vedic literature agrees that Krishna is the source of Brahma, Shiva, and all other demigods. Now Prabhupada is going to start quoting from the Upanishads. This is coming from his commentary he was reading. In the Atharva Veda, the Gopal Tapani Upanishad 124, it is said, Yo Brahmanam Vedadhati Purvam Yo Vai Vedangscha Gapayati Sma Krishna. It was Krishna who in the beginning instructed Brahma in Vedic knowledge and who disseminated Vedic knowledge in the past. Then again, the Narayan Upanishad 1 says, Ata Purusho Havai Narayano Kamayata Prajaha Sujayeti. Then the Supreme Personality Narayan desired to create living entities. The Upanishad continues, Narayanan Brahma Jayate Narayanan Prajapati Prajayate Narayanad Indro Jayate Narayanad Ashtau Vasavo Jayante Narayanad Ekadasha Rudra Jayante Narayanad Dvadashadityaha. From Narayan, Brahma is born, and from Narayan the patriarchs are also born. From Narayan, Indra is born. From Narayan, the 8 Vasus are born. From Narayan, the 11 Rudras are born. From Narayan, the 12 Adityas are born. This Narayan is an expansion of Krishna. It is said in the same Vedas, Brahmanyo Devaki Putraha, the son of Devaki, Krishna, is the Supreme Personality. Narayan Upanishad 4. Then it is said, Eko vai Narayana asi na Brahma neshano napo nagniso mau neme dyab apatabi na nikshatrani na suryaha. In the beginning of the creation, there was only the Supreme Personality Narayan. There was no Brahma, no Shiva, no water, no fire, no moon, no heaven and earth, no stars in the sky, no sun. This is from the Maha Upanishad 1.2. In the Maha Upanishad, it is also said that Lord Shiva was born from the forehead of the Supreme Lord. Thus the Vedas say that it is the Supreme Lord, the creator of Brahma and Shiva, who is to be worshipped. In the Moksha Dharma section of the Mahabharata, Krishna also says, Prajapatim cha rudram chap yaham eva svajami vai tau himam na bhajanito mama maya vimohitao. The patriarchs, Shiva and others, are created by me. though they do not know that they are created by me, because they are deluded by my illusory energy. In the Varaha Purana, it is also said, Narayanak paro devas tasmad jatas chaturmukaha tasmad rudro bhavandeva sacha sarva gitam gataha. Narayan is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and from him Brahma was born, from whom Shiva was born. Lord Krishna is the source of all generations, and he is called the most efficient cause of everything. He says, because everything is born of me, I am the original source of all. Everything is under me, no one is above me. There is no supreme controller other than Krishna. One who understands Krishna in such a way from a bona fide spiritual master, with references from Vedic literature, engages all his energy in Krishna consciousness and becomes a truly learned man. In comparison to him, all others who do not know Krishna properly are but fools. Only a fool would consider Krishna to be an ordinary man. A Krishna-conscious person should not be bewildered by fools. He should avoid all unauthorized commentaries and interpretations on the Bhagavad Gita and proceed in Krishna consciousness with determination and firmness. Yes? Okay, because we want to share with others. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have class tomorrow and Wednesday also. Yeah. No, the other side. Yeah.
It says in Prabhupada saying that in the Maha Upanishad it said that Lord Shiva was born from the forehead of the Supreme Lord. I thought that in Bhagavatam that
was forwarded, that he was born from Brahma's forehead.
From the forehead of Lord Brahma.
It could happen in different ways in different kalpas.
I see.
You know, that's what I can see of that. Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't notice that when I first read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the you know, why did Prabhupada quote all these, you know, Upanishads? I mean, wouldn't it be enough to just quote one? You know, the whole philosophy, the whole practice rests on this proposition, you know, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna is God, and there are other opinions. You know, there's no God. God cannot be known. You know, you can choose your own God, whatever. So, on the basis of now these statements, of course, they seem, as Prabhupada sometimes says, they seem dogmatic. Krishna seems to be pretty dogmatic here, you know. But why do we have faith in them? And not only have faith in them, but we mold our lives on the basis of these statements. You know, every devotee in this Hare Krishna movement, and there are tens of thousands of them now, has faith in this statement of Krishna. Why? Because of what we call the parampara. Because Srila Prabhupada, when he came to America, what he was trying to do, and what he succeeded in doing, was planting the seed of faith. The faith has to be there. Now you can't have that faith because you know, this is all way beyond our ability to know directly. You know, I mean, this is just a little bit of it. What to speak of, you know, speaking of the details of Krishna's Leela and the Vaikuntha planets and so many things. How could we believe that? It seems to be way beyond what we know with our senses, what you know, we know as reality. Did somebody just make it up? So this is where we have this disciplic succession. Srila Prabhupada not only told us that it was true, but he lived it, and he showed by his activities and his very being what it means to be within the material world, but not of it. He was going through, you know, went through such struggle to start this movement and to grow the movement and all these different things, and yet he remained equipoised. He never, you know, became despairing and just gave up. Never had, you know, it wasn't like that. He was personifying the philosophy and the characteristics that are described in the books. And he introduced us to the whole, what I call the disciplic succession, what he called the disciplic succession, the parampara, which Krishna mentions here. He had his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who, you know, nobody knew much about him except what Prabhupada, you know, told us, which was a fair amount. But now we have full biographies and histories, and he was an amazing, extraordinary figure. And he believed all this. He lived by it. And he also displayed these qualities of a transcendentalist, risking his life, remaining unperturbed in the greatest danger, persevering amongst, sitting for 9 years in Mayapur in all kinds of weather and minimum shelter, chanting Hare Krishna, 1 billion names, and tremendous erudition. He read whatever he read once, he remembered it, And his father, another towering intellect, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the pioneer of the resurrection of Lord Chaitanya's movement in the 19th century, and it goes back, other great figures, all the way to Lord Chaitanya. These are historical figures. And they lived this philosophy. And they show by their lives how you can live so simply. The 6 Goswamis, practically nothing. I mean, you see these poor guys on the street, and they don't have anything. But they also don't have Krishna, and so they're miserable. And there's also a lot of madness, and walk home and some guy was, So far I haven't encountered anyone who's violent yet, But they also were living on the street. They had no fixed home. It's one thing to be poor, live in grow up in a poor family and have to do it a little bit and tolerate, But if you're very wealthy, and then suddenly you become poor, you can't live. Prabhupada would give an example of someone he knew in Calcutta who joined Gandhi's movement, voluntarily gave up all his riches. He was quite wealthy and wanted to live as a mendicant, with the loincloth like Gandhi. Couldn't do it. He committed suicide after a few months. It's horrible, because he had no connection with Krishna. So these Goswamis, 3 of them were like extremely wealthy. Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami were both the right and left hand of the king, Nawab Hussain Shah, at that time in Bengal. Tremendous wealth and influence. They were born in Brahmin families, but they were really kind of blackmailed into joining the government, because he threatened to persecute the Vaishnavas and Brahmins unless they joined. So they said, okay, we'll do it. But because they did, they were outcast, because they were working for the Muslim government. But they had so much wealth and everything, So then Lord Chaitanya came, and they encountered him, and they saw that he was God. They saw he was Krishna. That's another thing. There's 2 foundations of this movement, articles of faith, the left and the right hand. Krishna is God, and Lord Chaitanya is Krishna. At the beginning of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, so many verses, thousands of verses. The 3rd verse describes that. Yadadvaitam brahmo panachati tadapyasya tanubha yatmantar yami buddhajati so syangshibhava chadaishvarye purno yahiya bhagavan sasvayamayam the chaitanyat Krishna jagati padatatvam paramiha. And this says that the Brahman effulgence spoken of in the Upanishads and everywhere, that's but the effulgence of his body. And the super soul, the Antaryami, the witness within, that's his expansion. He is Krishna, full with these 6 opulences, these vibhutis, infinite wealth, strength, fame, knowledge, beauty, renunciation. There's no truth greater than Lord Chaitanya and Krishna in this world. Right there you have it. Krishna is God, Lord Chaitanya is Krishna. Now, who else are you going to worship? So, once we encounter these, Srila Prabhupada through his books, basically today, there's so many wonderful recordings, even many videos, we can still have a taste of his association, especially through his books. The seed of faith should be planted, so much, at least enough to be, so that we like to associate, read the books, and maybe take up the process of chanting. It doesn't cost anything. You can always give it up. Many do, but at least you can, begin to taste it. And if you're fortunate, it becomes revelatory to your life. It's a whole new way of being in the world. Like devotees, if we're doing our sadhana nicely, and here we're fortunate we can associate, we have nice kirtan, This pandemic, which is terrorizing people, is not the end of the world. There's a silver lining. So much preaching going on now through the internet. Sannyasis travel all over the world. And now if you just tune in, you hit the right buttons, you can get this. You can get the class by Shivarab Swami. There's Bhakti Bringa Govinda Swami leading a kirtan. There's Dinabandhu leading a parikrama around Vrindavan. You can still have it. So the point is that it doesn't devastate yourself. You don't feel alone. You've got the association of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. You've got the association of devotees. You can weather the storm, and you can see the shelter of Krishna consciousness, even in this horrible situation that's threatened. And we've had some, it was such a shock back in early 2020 when one of our major leaders passed away from COVID, Bhakti Charu Swami. Yeah, he was beloved by all, he was intimate associate of Prabhupada. And he succumbed, It was a shock to the system that we went on, And so that's the value of Krishna consciousness. Any questions from our listeners, remote listeners? Tapas?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam Prabhu.
Dandavat Pranam.
I see Prabhu, there are 11 people watching, but I don't see any questions.
How many watching?
11.
11. Thank you. 11. All right, so I'm going to end with a couple of poems, which I usually do. We have a few minutes. So, the Chataka, there's a bird who he doesn't drink water from the ground. He only drinks water that's directly from a cloud, Now, sometimes he gets water, sometimes he doesn't. So there's a verse about that, comparing it how we have to be one-pointed and serious in our worship to really make advancement. So there's a Sanskrit verse. Rupa Goswami writes it. It's quoted in the second canto. Vidachay mai dandam dina bando dayangva gatadihina bhavatta karchat anyamamasti nipatata shatakoti nirmalang bandavambas tadapikidapiorak stuyate chatakena. The Chataka subsists on rain. It catches in midair. And so it's always praying to the cloud to send its fare. Yet though that cloud may send a thunderbolt instead of rain, that bird continues praying fervently despite the pain. Just like the Chataka, I fix my mind upon one goal, and that is you, O Lord, most kind to every fallen soul. So whether it is punishment you send, or mercy sweet, I'll always pray to you for service to your lotus feet. So this is a very nice verse describing how we have to be determined, despite setbacks and despite difficulties, to persevere in our devotion. And the rewards are infinitely greater than our little austerities that we perform. I like to point out, and we'll end with this, that in ordinary life, there's a great struggle to get a little sense gratification. And there's no denying that there's some pleasure there. The whole world is moving on it. But it's very flickering. And oftentimes, especially in this age when there's nobody knows nothing about anything, that you're likely to perform some very severe sinful activities. And so a little pleasure, a cheeseburger with fries and ketchup, and the suffering is huge. You have to spend 1,000 years in hell for every hair on the body of that cow that you just ate. Was it worth it? That hamburger. So a little suffering, a little pleasure, a lot of suffering. That's sense gratification. And when it comes to Krishna consciousness, a little suffering, yes, you have to get up early, you have to chant Hare Krishna, you have to give up, illicit sex, intoxication, gambling, and meat eating. So that can be difficult at first, then it becomes second nature, and it doesn't bother you. And a whole lot of infinite happiness at the end. If you succeed, and may not succeed in one lifetime, hey, we've been going through millions and billions of lifetimes, a couple of more lifetimes maybe. But if you succeed, when you succeed, no more birth, no more death, no more old age, no more disease. You're reinstated in your original blissful life with Krishna, and ever-increasing happiness and bliss, no birth, no old age, no disease, no death. So which is a better investment? Yeah, you decide. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol. All right, we'll proceed with text 9 tomorrow. how to serve. It says that the devotee serves with great attention and faith. How? He gives in one verse the essence of it. Think of me. Dedicate your life. And talk about me.